Okay, buckle up, everyone, because this deep dive is, well, it's both incredible and heartbreaking, I have to say.
Oh, definitely.
We're tackling survival, resilience, the reality of the slave trade,
Yeah.
all happening on this tiny island in the Indian Ocean,
It's amazing, really.
Tromlin Island, right?
You got it.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how this tiny island, basically a volcano a long time ago, becomes this stage for this incredible story of resilience, like you said.
Yeah, and you said it, we're not talking like tropical paradise here.
No, not at all.
This is Tromlin Island, which when I picture it, I'm picturing like almost not even an island, more like a sandbar in the middle of nowhere.
You're not far off. It's a low-lying atoll, just a little bit of land sticking out of the ocean, and that's it. Think about it: scorching sun, barely any fresh water, like almost zero natural resources.
Okay, so I'm already feeling stranded and we're just getting started here, but this
Right.
isn't just a thought experiment. This is where we're going in our story.
Yeah, yeah.
So 1761, French ship, the Utile, sailing through the Indian Ocean. They've got Malagasy slaves on board from Madagascar, headed for Mauritius.
And this is where the geography we were talking about it plays a tragic role. The Utile, because they had these messed up maps, ends up wrecked on the reefs around the island.
Whoa. So a bunch of like little mistakes, a wrong calculation here, an outdated chart there, and it leads to like complete disaster.
Yeah, I mean,
Can you imagine what it was like on that ship as it's breaking apart?
it's just the terror, especially for the slaves. They were all locked below deck. There was practically zero chance they'd survive once the ship went down.
Oh my gosh.
And tragically, the crew, just trying to save themselves, they put their own escape above everything else.
It's hard to even wrap your mind on the cruelty. So how many people were on the Utile when it wrecked?
Well, they left with a crew of 142 men, and then after a stop in Mauritius, they took on 160 Malagasy men, women, and children. So a lot of souls on board.
Whoa.
When it went down, only the crew and about 60 of the Malagasy people even made it to the island alive.
Just heartbreaking. So they're stranded on this desolate island. What happens next? Did they try to help the Malagasy people who are now stuck too?
Well, the crew, they're in a bad spot themselves, obviously, with hardly any supplies. And the decision they make is, well, it's chilling. They decide to build a new boat from the wreckage. But they leave the Malagasy slaves behind.
They just abandon them.
They promise to return, of course,
Yeah.
but you have to look at the power dynamics at play, right? The crew, they were blinded by their own survival, and let's be real, the racist ideas that were everywhere back then. They just didn't prioritize the lives of the enslaved people.
They're left to fend for themselves on this barren island with a promise that who even knows if it'll be kept? What happens next? Do they ever come back?
Well, that's where the story takes an incredible turn, and we're going to get into that right after this.
So the crew, they just sail off, promise to come back for these people stuck on Tromlin. But something tells me this is where the whole forgotten part of this story comes in, doesn't it?
Yeah, sadly, you're right on the money there. The crew, they wanted rescue, obviously, so they get word back to the governor of Mauritius, pleading, begging for a ship to go back to Tromla and get those people to safety. But the governor, he says no. He says France is in the middle of this huge war, the 7 Years' War. They can't spare the ships.
The 7 Years' War, that was a big deal in Europe, right? I mean, it's crazy to think that a war going on thousands of miles away could determine the fate of people stuck on Trommelin.
It really shows you how connected the world already was, even back then. The war had drained France, and the governor, he basically argues that it's too risky to send a ship back for enslaved Africans. Said Mauritius itself might be attacked.
So the people on Trommelin, they're stranded, totally forgotten by the very people who promised to come back. Just a horrifying situation.
The despair, right? Can you even imagine?
It must have been absolutely overwhelming, But here's where this story, it goes from tragic to something incredible, honestly. It becomes this testament to what humans can endure. So you've got these 60 Malagasy men and women, practically no supplies, and they manage to survive on Trommelin for 15 years.
15 years? Are you serious? I can't go 15 minutes without looking at my phone.
Yeah.
How did they survive that long?
Well, like they say, necessity, it's the mother of invention. And they were resourceful, that's for sure. We've had archaeological digs on Trommelin, and they've shown us how these people lived. They built shelters, can you believe it, out of coral. You can still see some of their remains today. Hold on, shelters out of coral? That sounds insanely difficult.
Oh, backbreaking work, definitely. But it gave them some protection, right? From the sun, the storms, whatever came their way. And they salvaged everything they could from the Utile. Wood, tools, even nails. If it was useful, they found a way to use it.
It's like the ultimate ingenuity, right? Making do with almost nothing. But food, water, where did they get enough of that to actually survive?
They had to work with what little the island had. Seabirds, turtle eggs, whatever they could catch, basically.
Yeah.
Rainwater would have been the main source of water, and they would have to collect every drop. But there's this one thing, it's almost a symbol of how resilient they were, their hope, the fire.
A fire.
Right.
Wait, on an island with no trees, what did they even burn? Driftwood?
Yeah, every little piece of wood they could get from that ship, it became precious. They had to make it last because that fire, it kept burning. For 15 years, imagine that, a fire going constantly, like this beacon, right, against the darkness, this symbol that maybe someone would find them.
Man, it's powerful to think about that. Says a lot about their strength, you know. But during all that time, 15 years, did anyone try to rescue them? Did anyone even know they were still alive out there?
There were a couple close calls, actually. Moments that must have given them so much hope, only to have it ripped away. So, in 1773, a ship passes by, sees them on the island, reports it in Mauritius. They send a rescue ship. But get this, it can't get close enough because the seas are too rough. A day later, same thing happens. Another ship, they see the survivors, but they can't reach them.
Ah, so close, and yet so far. Each time, a little bit of hope, and then back to reality. It's just heartbreaking, but people did survive, right? What about the rescue? How did that finally happen?
So in 1776, 15 long years after the Utile went down a French ship, the Dauphine, finally makes it to Tromelin, the captain. A young ensign, Tromelin Lenegey.
Wait, Tromelin Island? You're saying the island is named after the guy who rescued them?
You got it. He's a big reason we even know this story.
Yeah.
Now, imagine, okay, you're this ensign, you get to this island, and there's this small group of people who've survived all this time, and they're wearing clothes made of feathers.
Feathers. Talk about resourcefulness. That image really says it all. Of everyone left behind, how many were actually still alive to see that ship?
Out of everyone, only 7 women and 1 baby who's born on the island, they were the only ones. 15 years. Ensign Tromelin Lenegey, he brought them to Mauritius, and they were finally free.
Free, but at such a cost. Their story, it's heartbreaking, but it's inspiring too, isn't it? I mean, you think about what humans can endure, but also the terrible things we do to each other.
Absolutely. And, their story, it doesn't end there. What happened to these forgotten slaves of Tromelin Island, it had this ripple effect that went way beyond that little island.
Oh, now you've got me. What happened? How does their story keep going?
Well, that's what we'll get into when we get back.
Okay, you've got to tell me more. I'm hooked now.
Okay.
What happened to those women and that little baby after they were rescued? You said the story doesn't end there.
It doesn't. Their story, as awful as it was, it actually became really important to the fight against slavery. Like in 1781, there was this French philosopher, the Marquis de Condorcet.
Right.
He wrote about them, the forgotten slaves, in his book. Reflections on the Slavery of Negroes, it was called.
Condorcet, he was a big deal during the Enlightenment, right, when everyone was starting to question slavery and stuff.
Exactly. And he was totally against it. He used what happened on Tromelin as like a case study, this powerful example of how cruel and unfair the slave trade was.
So those people, they're suffering. As awful as it is to think about, it helps show the rest of the world just how bad slavery was.
Exactly. Their story, it became something abolitionists really rallied behind. It just shows you, even in the darkest times, sometimes a story can change things.
It's kind of hard to believe. Something that happened on this tiny island, in the middle of nowhere, it had that big of an impact.
I know, right? And it still hasn't ended.
Yeah.
Even now, Tromelin Island, it's still got secrets. Archaeologists, they've been going there, trying to find out more about the people who were stranded.
Wow, and what have they found? Anything really amazing?
Oh, yes, some incredible stuff. They've actually found the foundations of those shelters, the ones built from coral.
No way.
Yeah. They found tools the survivors made from the shipwreckage, which is just, wow, so resourceful. Even little things like cooking tools that they've fixed over and over. It's really powerful.
I know. It's funny how the normal stuff, the stuff we don't even think about, it becomes so powerful when you know the story behind it.
For sure. And get this, they even found this old logbook, probably written by one of the crew members.
Right.
It's got firsthand accounts of the shipwreck, what happened, the decisions they made.
It's like a direct link to the past, hearing it straight from them.
Exactly. And it's important because it helps us see the whole picture better. The fear, the desperation, all of it.
The story of Tromelin Island, it makes you think about, I don't know, the strength people have, but also how cruel we can be to each other.
It's true. It forces us to look at bad stuff, but also see the hope, the will to survive, even when things seem impossible.
It makes you think about how we remember things, how we learn from the darkest parts of history.
And it makes us ask ourselves, how do we treat each other now? How does power, influence what we do? And maybe, most importantly, it reminds us that we have to speak up when we see injustice, no matter what.
It's a story you don't forget, that's for sure. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the story of Tromelin Island. It's a story of tragedy, resilience, and the enduring power of the human spirit. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.